Welcome to Simply Sacred, a loving gaze at the inner world in a modern society. I'm your host, Auroara Leigh, and co-host, Kaja Gjesdal, and we are here with Ishta Devi. Did I say that right?
Yeah, that works. Perfect.
That's awesome. And you can find her at ishtadevi.com, and she is an amazing trauma healer, somatic expert with like this flair of beautiful sacred art and divine feminine. And I'm really glad that she's here with us today.
Yeah.
Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about breaking generational cycles and why is that such an inspirational topic, and how common is that conversation right now in our landscape, in our narrative, in our social narrative, in our communities, in our families, and even in ourselves. And how do we form language around that? How do we form an understanding and capacity around that, as that capacity of language is what helps to build confidence in creating that journey. There's people who have trailblazed the healing journey for quite some time, and they can be sought after as those role models for the journey, but the journey is always individual to what is best for you. But I really like to bring people on such as Ishta to show that she is a true role model in that sacred journey. So thank you so much for being here, and I hope that this topic resonates with you.
Thanks. Yeah, it really does. And as to what you were just saying in terms of like, is it showing up as a topic of interest or in the spaces I'm in? Definitely, yes. Like a lot of clients coming to me are recognizing that, they're the one that's been given that duty to break the intergenerational traumas that have been in their lineage. And it's usually the first step is just recognizing that there is a trauma to be healed. And then with closer investigation, there's the realization that this is intergenerational, this is ancestral, and it can be traced back. And there's so much power in that. It gives like, the power of knowledge that can help support that process to heal.
Well, and I think what we were saying, earlier is I find it's definitely growing in the way that I'm seeing there's so many more women and mothers, like we were saying, of this of the desire to hold space and safety as the womb, right? As we know, like the womb is that safe space. And so more and more women coming out, and I was saying this for a while before, I was like, when the women can heal, when we heal our stuff and then can hold space for like the men and others, like it's so powerful. And like you said too, like I think it is this shifting right now of so much of this being able to talk about mental health, being able to talk about like secrets, things that maybe were secrets in our families, and have that container and be able to talk about this with no shame, with no blame. It's just such a powerful time, and it's exciting that people are willing to look deep, and that we're building these containers that people can open up to. It's a powerful time. I'm so grateful for you and so many that are doing this now.
Yeah, I mean, essentially we're all here for it, right? I mean, that's what magnetized our energies together, is this common kind of soul calling to create those safe spaces, to initiate those conversations, to examine like what is there in that safe womb-like container, as you say. And it is definitely the role of women to create those spaces where there's, compassion present, where we are able to observe without judgment and to shine a compassionate gaze on, whatever shadows are emerging, whatever shame is showing up. And that compassion, essentially, it dissolves the shame and it allows for healing to happen. And that's a very unique quality of the feminine.
Hmm.
And it is on it does feel like in a way, it's on everyone. But that said, we all have masculine and feminine qualities in us, but the ultimate healing and reclamation of the true role of the feminine in her rightful place within, the cosmic, like principles. When we assume that role that is in like right relation to all that is around us, then the brokenness that is occurred from a society that has been kind of in that toxic masculine aspect of the patriarchy for so long, once we heal that like major collective wound, then from that origin wound, so much more, including the masculine aspects and all these other aspects, can be healed from that space. I've heard it be said in many places. I can't quote like exactly, but something into the effect of like the mother is the foundation of the village. And when she's not available because she's dealing with trauma, then there's no support and there's no foundation for the village to thrive.
I found
Definitely.
like I'm here in a northern community that has like it's stricken by many tough statistics here and realities and trauma and cycles of trauma that there's no capacity that's really talked about yet. And so coming back after my like long journey 7 years away, which I started when I got pregnant and being a mother, having a daughter, I decided I needed to break the cycles. But at 19, that was never talked about. I just knew it in my core. And I didn't really know what that even meant yet by choosing that, what I was entering into in this journey. And so when I came back, I was so excited to bring this toolkit, but there's so much shame that it's like, it just gets shut down. And so just me being present in a space triggers people because I have eyes that see, because I have even a nurturing presence that is aware, but then I have boundaries that say no to normalized things, which then of course shines a mirror, which then of course is uncomfortable. And so I actually climbed this mountain when I first moved back, and I was just meditating at the top, and it overlooks the whole town. And then I was just feeling into, my role here, and I could just sense and see so clearly that people communicate from shaming each other. They're not even actually speaking to one another. They're talking, shaming, shame, protection from shame, shame. And I thought, wow, like I know I'm here for a reason, and I know I can't take it personal how things are projected onto me, but this is going to be hard, right?
Yeah, it's a tall order for sure when you're in that environment. There's no doubt.
Well, that's like how holding accountability, right, without shame and blame is very challenging. Like, how do we do that in our society, right? Like, how do we allow someone to say, like, I've done, so and so this thing, I've done this horrible thing, that, often, as we know, is something generational and comes from our childhood, and be like, okay to voice it, and for someone to have compassion, right? To have compassion that, you know what, you were a small child, this has happened, and to not blame anyone, your parent. I mean, even right now, right, as healing is becoming more trendy, and people start, looking at the perpetrators and or where this pain has come from, and to not, you know, come into this whole like you're going to attack that person now because they did that, right? Like it's very, this is where the skills and the experience really come in. And I feel like that's the thing with our shadow work and stuff too, is that the importance of us doing our work before we go out there, right? That facilitators have done their own shadow work and spent a lot of time in the dark nights of the soul before they help others, especially as things become trendy and people jump on board, right? And that's why it's so important to have, more healers and on this show to have this like trust, right? Of people's work and sharing our stories openly without shame and yeah.
Modeling that.
Totally. I feel all that you just said. And yeah, like shame emerges from, of course, the trauma, right? And the the shame is like, in a way, a veil of illusion that comes between ourself and our true self, like us to know ourself. So rather we exist in that veil of illusion until we can lift it. And again, the only way to lift that veil of illusion is to bring compassion to it and bring curiosity as well. Like, because trauma healing isn't always gloom and doom. It's actually fun because there are wins that happen, you know, and it's a celebration when we can like become free from the shackles of, you know, the trauma response that we're living in, and it allows us to come, you know, to like merge once again, to return home to our true self and to become to that next level of authenticity and expression and freedom in who we really are, which I believe, you know, we are all divine beings. And as much as like all of the layers of our human experience are sacred and very real, the ultimate reality is that we are, you know, a divine spiritual being within this human experience that is ever changing. The one thing that never changes is the light at your center, the consciousness that is your essential self. And when we can come into that place where we can watch the unfoldment of our human experience from that place, then we're not dissociated. We're actually resting in the heart space, the center of this unfolding, sometimes chaotic and distracting human experience, but we can watch from that place. And then we're not getting pulled into like a shame story or getting pulled into, you know, a guilt story or a judgment story or a comparison story or any of those stories, because we're anchored into our center and into our wisdom, into our self-knowing. So, you know, from that place, everything is possible. It's just a matter of getting there, and it requires healing.
Hmm. I love how you also, I work with entheogens as well, like with the golden teachers and for neuroplasticity, and just the the time now of being able to bring in these medicines to assist as well, like the tools. So just talking about the tools, like there are, you know, the tools are out there right now more than ever, which is so exciting. But then the importance of having someone to guide right through these times. And I love how you also use dance. I've always used dance as well as movement. And I think when you say celebration, that celebrate those wins, dance is one of the most powerful ways to celebrate. And I find in people that I work with, I don't know about you, but a lot of people are disconnected from the dance, right? Like in shaman, you know, in shamanism, we talk about all the time, like, when did you stop singing? When did you stop dancing?
Yeah.
That's that beautiful joy that can come in when you're like, feel more free and right, and can embody this like beauty that we are.
So true. I love that. I'm getting goosebumps from that. And there's something so special to be said about like embodiment practices and coming into kind of like an intuitive flow within the body. It brings us present into the moment is what it does, because we're not calculating when the dance is free. We're not calculating like the steps or the moves or anything. We're not thinking about, we're like, you know, dance like no one's watching. Well, they say that because when are you able to do that, you can become free, and it brings you know, a sense of presencing in the moment that again brings you into the center of your experience. And I notice, you know, sometimes when I dance or I'll make a video of myself dancing, when I'm in that presence where it's just like the movement is completely spontaneous, it's not calculated, that's when like there's a radiance that comes through. And then as soon as I'm like, oh, like I'm gonna do this, like it's gone, right? It's just gone.
That's like the Tao, right? When you think you've got it, it goes because you think
Totally.
yeah,
Exactly. And it's a feminine art form, and it existed before, and it had a very sacred place within the society before, you know, the days previous two witch burnings, before the Crusades, before patriarchy came into to rise in the way that we live now. Before that, you know, many women had the role of being that dancer, and in many places where there were temples, you know, there were temple dancers, and they were acting as a conduit and a channel of the divine, and people sat in their presence to receive those beautiful downloads of that divine energy. And
Yes.
yeah, it's a mystical thing that we can do. And it's always accessible. Like the things that are free, like breath, like dance, like
Water.
conversation, water, as it should be free, springing forth from a spring in the ground. Like all of the best resources for our mental and physical, spiritual health are free. It's not complicated.
I think that's a powerful statement for listeners to hear, and women to hear, and mothers to hear, as we're emulating this aspect of breaking generational cycles and showing their children that as well. And yet, and I remember learning this when I did my yoga teacher training in my early 20s, and thinking about, you know, these aspects that are free, and yet we have shallow breathing in our culture and dehydration in our culture.
Yeah.
So that speaks to that disconnect that we're taught, that we can only get health through certain means, and not realizing it's right there and available to you right now. And when I work with many like survivors, especially survivors of certain traumas, you know, sometimes they're at that victim state of, you know, like, well, I can't, or I can't afford to go and do this, or, you know, and because poverty really links a lot with, you know, capitalism and the patriarchy and that dominant structure of who it serves and lifts up the most, and then who it doesn't, right?
Totally.
And so those survivors often don't have the means to go to, you know, a concussion therapist and an acupuncturist and all of these people.
Yeah.
But there's tools available, and there's YouTube videos available. There's, you know, there's certain yoga nidra practices that are available all the time, right? Or and I think that is a really powerful message to ground, and hopeful message to ground for listeners who are just starting their healing cycle and feel like it's overwhelming and it's so much, and they don't have supports, and to know that they are their best support, that their breath is their best support at times.
Yeah, 100%. And just like add to that, scarcity is a colonial construct, as you know, that keeps us in our trauma stories. It keeps us in our victim stories. It keeps us in our trauma response and in this trauma mind control program. Like, but and as you said, it's so powerful to realize that the abundance of everything we need is actually right here, right now. As hard as that is to believe, I know, like if you don't have money for groceries, like, yeah, that's the broken system. But like to heal, you do have access. It requires discipline is the thing. And people often, you know, especially when you're deep in the victim space, and I can speak to that because I've been there, it's like we want to outsource our healing. Like, well, if I can only if I only had the money to access this resource, then I would be able to heal. But that's just, you know, it's just another lie that you're telling yourself to prolong stepping into your power, right? So, which is part of what happens as a result of healing. You step more fully into your power. And that, of course, can be very intimidating for people because it's maybe a place they haven't really ever been allowed to be.
Yeah. I remember a powerful speaker once, and I forget who it was, but he said, people will always come to me after and be like, oh, I need so much support. I want your support. And they say, oh yeah, I will give you it. Here's my email, reach out. But because it gives them that it's on you to do a step, he often wouldn't get an email. I have had that where I can tell, you know, there's this aspect of I'm not okay and I need money and I need support and I can't heal. And so I would offer, well, there's this sweat lodge ceremony actually in your community I know about. I can link you. Here's their number. Or there's this other space that's actually, you know, it doesn't cost money, but they don't choose it. And I'm not saying all people, if they don't choose sweat lodge, like obviously if it's not right for them or they don't feel it connects to their spirituality, then that's different. But I could give a series of solutions
Yeah.
or possible avenues to explore, but then they don't, right? So it's that familiarity with the victim. It's the familiarity of the energy. And I've been there as well, right? Like with certain aspects and certain times in my life.
Sure, for sure. Yeah. So
I think,
yeah, go ahead.
all right, I think that part of that though too is like, because is that idea that before, like there'd be a time where a community or a family would heal together, right? So
Mhm.
it takes a lot for someone, especially, you know, in the West here, to be able to say like, look, I'm going to go into this healing, but then who is the support system in that environment that they have all the time, right? But if you did have, right, like the families healing together, like I really, the idea of, I've been in a ceremony in ayahuasca once where it was the mother and the daughter that just kept, right, like back and forth purging with each other, and it's like to be able to do that with the person, with your family, is a whole other, I think we're coming into that more understanding,
Yeah.
like healing centers where families heal together,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
that's, I think, going to help a lot more people do the work because they're not going to feel alone. Not that we are alone,
Mhm.
but sometimes for sure it can feel like you are. No one understands like what I'm going through right now. Who can sit and hold me right now? You know? Yeah,
Oh, 100%. And that is such a valid point to add because I do think that that is a barrier to many people. And it's true, like a lot of people are alone. If everyone else in your family is deep in the trauma program and they don't want to wake up, and you're the only one who's, getting like an inkling and a call to heal yourself. And I know this from just observing so many people that are in that position. They're at that like first step. And it even and often is a childhood wound that they need to bring forth and work on. And if they mention it to the family wants to shut it down. And then there isn't that safe community and safe space. And that's why I always work with my clients and in my groups, with safety being the first step. And part of safety safety is completely holistic concept. It applies to all levels of our human experience. And one of those levels is relationships, relationally. Who is your network? Who are your people that are supporting this process that you're stepping into? Like, who are the people that aren't? And how are you going to set boundaries and maybe even, reduce harmful relationships so that you are in a position where you have that support around you, and then you can move into the process of doing that work. So creating that safe and sacred container for the healing to occur is definitely like a big part of that is community. Because if you don't have that, then yeah, you're on the path on your own, and it's not as fun, and it's not as rewarding, and it's not as it's a lonely path when you have to do it alone. I mean, ultimately, we are alone in the sense that, we're our own like saviors. We're our own guardians. We're the ones that are I recently posted a meme on my Instagram that was like, it said, like, my biggest flex is becoming the woman who was meant to protect me as a child, or something like that, later. So it's kind of like realizing, like, yeah, it is up to me to show up for myself in whichever way, whether that's protecting myself or, being accountable, but to have a community around you that is supporting that process.
I just recently did a deep shamanic Reiki session with a trusted woman here that I met when I initially moved back. And she's been through my whole process with facing court and my abuser from my childhood. And and restoring that safety and trust and divine feminine in myself. And so I did a last session with her this week, really coming out of my birth canal in a way, because I really felt I was in the birth canal that this past week while I was doing my court process.
Oh, wow.
Because I never would have been able to hear him, and I got to hear him for the first time since I was 7. I didn't get to see him because the screen was facing the judge, but I got to hear him. And there's no way I could have done that before. When I went to face this and choose to face this, even just getting an MRI on my brain, like a brain scan, I didn't leave my house for 3 weeks. I went into like a turtle shell. And so I think one of those things, that's obviously a brainstem freeze response, right? That I couldn't, like, I needed to hide and I needed to be safe and I needed to preserve. I think it would have been drastically different if there was a community of compassion, a community of safe space, like sharing things. And I had that from my home, from my phone, from my people, but not necessarily the community.
Yeah.
And I think the big piece here is, and what I see when I explore healing modalities with others or what they're representing, there's a huge difference between big T trauma and little T trauma. And so when we're asking people to face their stuff, that could be a 4-year journey. And it is just a sprinkle at first that they are beautiful, worthy, they matter. You know, like just a sprinkle, there's the soil you're setting. And so there's a huge difference. And when there's healers that maybe are just, you know, shotgun healers, I could say, like they're just go embody and manifest and do this and come. I've watched, I have, as I did my Reiki when I was also in my early 20s. I did my Reiki level 1, 2, and 3. So I was doing Reiki with a group of people once at for a rehabilitation center in Kelowna. But I watched these healers that didn't understand what big T trauma is. And these people had big T trauma and they were like, bring your spirit into your body, come on. And they were trying to ground them in and don't disassociate. Well, no, they still are disassociating because it's going to take layers for them to trust what it means to fully be present.
Totally.
There's a huge difference, and I don't think it's talked about enough, the differences, you know, of how you would approach the same modality, but how it's caters differently for those with complex trauma.
100%. And sometimes that process of establishing safety, like you said, can take 4 years or 2 years. And then the other 2 years is maybe inside of processing and integration. But it can be a long haul, and that patience and permission to take your time. I love that song by who's that artist, Trevor
Paul?
Yes. You can't rush your healing. That track, so true. You know, it can't be rushed, and safety is the foundation. So you got to really spend the time in that step. Yeah.
I think the dream too is that we have more like integration centers in every community, right? Like that's the thing where I think too, people go away to Costa Rica or they go away somewhere and they have this amazing time because they're in a community, right? Healing and healers. And then they go back home and it's like, oh my gosh, right? Back to how are you going to keep these disciplines going? How are you going to have this place? Like we need these integration centers. We need these community places like everywhere, you know, and brought up the thing, like, yeah, we have these tools and they are free. That was part of my journey, was like seeing that my partner had to die, you know, because, you know, we couldn't afford for him to heal when I was learning that most of this is free, right? But then you come to, and you mentioned a little bit of it, like, and when we deal with, you know, a lot of this is, of course, the root of mental health is our food, right? That's the one piece though, too, that like is a little bit more challenging for people to access is, you know, I know I had to support my body so much to do the healing, to have the capacity to heal as well, to support the body as it's going into deeper spaces and stuff that we have you know, the healthy diet as well.
Yeah, and that's again like another layer of attack that is happening on you know, population is having now a lack of food sovereignty, like not being able to access food that is grown in biodynamic soil that offers the body and the gut, the serotonin levels. We produce like 90% of our serotonin in our gut, as you know. And, you know, if we're lacking that serotonin chemically, we can't, it's hard to move forward if we're not feeling good, right? Like emotionally, based on just like the chemistry of our bodies.
This would be a perfect plug for Biome. So I'm doing I am doing the Biome subscription where you get the specific probiotics for your gut health, and I have become a affiliate sponsor for that. So that's a perfect plug for that.
Yeah,
My
do
link
share.
I'll put
Do
my
share.
link in the podcast. But it's true, like when Kaja, when you say when people go away and they heal and they have it and then they come back, I've watched people split, like psychologically split, because now they're present.
Yeah.
They're not coping through being like, you know, outside of their body a bit, like enduring, right? They've now become present because they've been in a wholesome community. They come back, and because they're more present, they're feeling it more, and they've actually split. And I've watched this. And I think that, you know, our policies around actually creating these integrative centers need to be done on such a fundamental level. You know, I think we miss the boat when we don't connect these experts that truly know trauma research to the actual, you know, things being applied on the ground level, things that the government has millions for grants and things to have healing centers now. But what steps are being ensured, you know? And same with plant medicine. There's so much need for integration, and from that intensity, and then to a Western culture that again in disassociates, it's fed off of people being disconnected and wants you to be disconnected, that people fracture because it's two different worlds. It's mixing worlds without having cohesion. And I believe that, you know, I remember when I had someone here, and I'm not going to say like particulars, but remember, Kaja, when you said they need all of that nutrition, they're just eating comfort food, right? But for them psychosomatically, like for themselves, that would be too much to put them on a plant-based diet, right? That would have fractured their system.
Yeah, because when I was working in the downtown east side, when I was volunteering over COVID, like that was the biggest thing where I was like, I mean, and that was my realization, just like you said, like they want the coffee, they want the sugar, right? Because that is like the pleasure that they actually know they can have that day, right? And what that is, but I was like, well, how are we gonna get them their gut healthy? How are we gonna get them into this other place? I was like, can we bring in chai? Can we bring in like, you know, chaga hot chocolate, right? Like, how can we do this? And it was just like, well, is anyone going to want that, right? Because they're of the state that they're in. And I understood how, like, and we do, like, sugar, oh my God, right? Like the pleasure and the emotional connection to food is huge, right? Our body loves food, you know, and that's a very quick and accessible system. Because I mean, Tim Hortons, like, it's just like, you know, how do you, and they say like once you can control discipline, right? Like as just said, like discipline is so huge. And when you can control what enters your body, like that's quite powerful. But at the same time, I mean, you know, I don't know, it's quite a feat in that way.
Totally.
Brings it back to mothers again when we're talking about breaking the generational cycles. We may not have power over certain spaces of like inspiring that change, but we do have power in our homes and in what we choose to feed our children and how we support that love and that bonding and that nourishment and that relationship with food. And that is a great way to believe that intergenerational cycle healing is possible, right in the family unit, because it's the mothers that really, you know, support everyone. And that's why women are the heartbeat of the community. They're the sacred fire. And then the men are very important, and they're the sacred fire pit that's also needed to support that relationship. And so, you know, for mothers to be inspired by this conversation, or fathers, right? And fathers to be inspired by this conversation of bringing that nourishment, thinking of, you know, what's my relationship to food in the house, and how can I shift that mindset with my young ones? Because then it becomes their relationship with food.
Yeah, absolutely. Mhm.
Any other intriguing topics we could enter into? We should ask you some questions, Ishta. So how about your name? Like, so you're an Indigenous woman in Canada. You're in Vancouver, right?
Yes.
Yes. And you practice Eastern medicine philosophy. Do you marry that with aspects of Indigenous culture as well?
Totally. Yeah. And my trauma healing method that I call trauma cleanse, is really a bringing together of like these clinical approaches and what I refer to as universal ancestral wisdom. Because I'm sure you have noticed, both of you have noticed that there are these universal cosmic principles that we can take note of in all Indigenous cultures throughout the world. And, you know, these include the polarities of masculine and feminine. We can look at, you know, the cardinal directions of the Indigenous people of Turtle Island and, you know, compare that to so many other traditions that we see around the world. The elements of creation, those are in there: earth, air, water, fire, and ether at the center. We have the chakratic system, and we can find the chakra system being reflected in, you know, the Kabbalistic traditions, in even in the Hopi tradition, they have like a version of the chakras, like uh, in Hermeticism, alchemy, we see this process of calcination, of bringing lead into gold, of drawing that Kundalini energy, the creative energy, up the channel to create an awakening. And through that process, we're clearing these themes or these aspects in our lives of, you know, the foundation of our sexual expression and power, of, you know, the realms of the heart, the realms of the expression, which, you know, is we find in like the throat chakra. And then as we clear those spaces and clear the karmas, as they say, we get to, you know, rise up into the third eye, where all the magic happens.
Yes, right. We're such a society of like we're so used to being in a space of suffering. We're so programmed that we're here to suffer and suffer,
Totally.
right?
Yeah.
That to come to this place, and this is where, you know, sexuality and spirituality, like I feel like for them, like we're here to enjoy our spirit in a human form, and to enjoy, like, to experience love and touch and all these senses in this human body, and that is like orgasmic. That is bliss. That is what we're really here to experience.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
I am so with you on that tantric philosophy. Like, what I love about tantra, and I was when I discovered it, so, you know, again, like in my 20s as well, when I started getting into yoga and doing teacher trainings, I was always in this dilemma, like dualistic or non-dualistic. Like, are we one or are we separate? Like, you know, and then I came across these tantra principles, and it's just like, yes, we are all one and we're all separate. It's both, and everything is sacred. Everything is sacred. Going into, you know, the experience of being in this human form, and, you know, the senses that come with that, the sensory body that comes with that, and being able to like fully become present into that very sensuous experience of being embodied in human form is a path to enlightenment, which is the ultimate understanding that we're all intricately connected and there is no separation. So there's always a paradox as well in these ancestral wisdom teachings, and that like our separation can lead us to our oneness, you know, like that sounds so paradoxical and like counterintuitive, but you know, this is where we honor both the above and both the below. That law of convergence, so within, so without, as above, so below. The polarities of creation, they need each other to, you know, to merge, to create that divine union that is, like you say, so expansive and so orgasmic, to, you know, feel that bliss of connection and of presence that is essentially like, you know, it's a healing thing.
I feel a lot of healing energy just talking to you. Like I can feel, I'm quite sensitive. I feel it even working with me, like as you're talking. And so I'm curious for listeners' sake, like what will they explore if they go into your trauma cleanse program? Is that in person? Is there a virtual option? I see that you have a free gift on your website. That's amazing. Check it out, everyone. But what can they expect with the trauma cleanse?
Yeah, so I just actually finished. We had our integration call last night with my first group that I took through as an online container. It was a 21-day journey. And so I'm going to be offering those twice a year. It's a closed container, and we go through this method that I have curated from, you know, my trainings and also just my personal, like, you know, journey of healing my trauma. And so we like I said, we start in safety. We start in safety and we examine safety fully. So in this particular container, we spent a week on safety, and then we spent a week and a bit on processing. And then we spent, you know, the final time on integration. But within each of those stages, all of them exist. So just by simply introducing safety, you're already stepping into processing. And like within like those little micro healings and realizations, there are integrations, right? So they all do kind of weave together. Just like everything sacred, like it's intricately connected, it's inextricable, like you can't separate. Everything is connected, as we learn, like, you know, with what you were saying in terms of plant medicine, like this is just what it does. It creates those neural connections. It makes us connect the dots and realize like this is connected. We become connected. Where trauma is the program of separation, when we come back together in connection and the realization that everything is I know I'm going on a bit of a tangent here, but yeah, apart from the closed containers, I'm going to be launching the program as a self-guided journey. Probably by, you know, the end of this month. I'm kind of like tweaking the details in the program. So you would enter in and you would start, of course, at safety. There's a book that I wrote. It's called The Trauma Cleanse. And I've separated into chapters of ebooks that get, you know, that are in each stage. So when you go into safety, there's 3 chapters on safety, and you can read it or you can listen to the audiobook, because I made audiobooks. There's journal prompts, and as well, you get access to what I call somatic breath rituals. So these are breath practices that are resources that facilitate the steps and stages of trauma healing, safety especially. As we know, the breath is like our best resource to regulate our nervous system. I really work within these breath principles and practices, or I like to call them rituals, because I think of the body as the temple and the heart as the portal or the altar, and the breath is the prayer. So with those 3 aspects, we can really create a lot of alchemy with our breath, and we can use it to clear our energy, to ground ourselves, to come into our true authentic self, to nurture and to stoke that fire, that divine spark within. We can use it to create protection, to clear the energy. And then also at the very end in integration, we do some manifestation practices. You can balance your polarizing energies with your breath. There's a lot of techniques that I share in that. And I'm also creating, and it will be out soon, a 21-day journey. So every morning or whenever you choose to spend the time with yourself and your breath, you can tune into like a 5 to 10 to 15-minute breath practice, and they build on each other. So by the end of those 21 days of exploring breath in your body, you're going to have like your own breath practice and be able to, like, for example, when you're in the downtown east side, which I also worked for a year in the downtown east side, you know, there's moments where you're like, oh my God, like there's a lot of energy here around me. I need the protection breath, like right now. Or, ooh, something's kind of got into my field here. I need to clear it out and then protect my energy. Or I'm feeling dissociated. I need to ground. So being able to like harness those practices when you need them. So that's a part of the trauma cleanse. It's a really important resource that I share. And then I also have, because I'm a clinical hypnotherapist, I've made like a series of journeys, guided journeys as well, that are available within the processing part of the journey. And they're just like guided, you know, deep relaxation. And then there's a process for the mother-father root wound. There's a process for the inner child, one for the shadow self, one for toxic trauma bond cord removal, and necessary sometimes, and then returning to your true self. So there's little journeys. That one is at the end too. So
You're
yeah.
amazing. So, one last question.
Mhm.
And then I want to say we should get you on again and we could have a segment just on the mother wound and just on the father wound. I think that holding those would be powerful. And so let's plan that if you're interested. But the last question, so for your trauma cleanse, do people go in with an intention? Because when you're talking about a process, of course, there's so many layers on the journey. Do you prompt them to do a particular single intention, or?
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning, I have people tune into 3 things initially. It's like your gratitude, like what are you grateful for now? What is your prayer for healing? And what are you manifesting? And through that, you can kind of find that piece, like what is the piece that I'm bringing into the process? And within trauma cleanse, we work both top down and bottom up. So from a cognitive standpoint, we work a lot like with the tools of narrative therapy. So looking at your trauma story, the unresolved parts of your trauma story, like what parts of that story are you bringing into the work? And then we look at like the characters in that story. Of course, the shadow self is the main character. And we also have the child and the mother-father aspects as well. So it's kind of like, what are you bringing in? And then through that, yeah, everything like unfolds. It can evolve though. I won't ever hold someone to like, well, you said you were working on this piece, so like you just got to stick with that. Like it can evolve because you might bring forward a part of your story and then realize, oh, actually there's this connected part that, you know, origins further down the chronology of my life. And I actually want to work on this piece. Yeah. So the answer is yes.
Okay. Such a neat aspect of all 3 of us here, I feel. And when you're talking about people who channel through dance, I really saw Kaja light up because that's what she does. Like, and she was like, I know I'm speaking for you, Kaja, but like when she talks about her purpose and you know, she's deeply studying these philosophies, she just wants to dance and she wants to be invited to dance. So on some spiritual level, like, you know, she just knows that that's the channeling that she wants to offer people. And so it was so neat when you said that.
Yeah. Words are so limiting. I mean, the English language is a colonizer language, right? We don't have access to words that express deep and profound, important concepts. Dance, you don't need words. You can communicate all of that. And dance is an energetic language, and you can transmit and transmute so much with dance. And the next time I visit Kelowna and we need to hang out, I would love to just be in your presence and receive, a dance. It's not a performance. I know it's not performative. It is a channeling. And so that would be such a deep honor to be able to be in that,
Oh,
in
I
your
just
present
dream
work.
of the women, especially like all of us dancing in like without any like fear, any any restraint. Like it said it earlier, like the priestesses, the temples, the temple dancers. Like I've had so many downloads of that, of like past, and it's just, it is the language, indigenous cultures too, like sound, just like you said, English language, like what, 2000 years, like way before that, like for so long we were in these sound, right? Sound and movement, and that was our language, right? And so coming back to that, it's such an important, I get so much clarity when I dance, after I dance, and so much like energy, right? You as a dancer, you feel it, you're just like, oh, and when you're there.
Mm,
Pass that energy through. I think that's part of what the trauma was that women dancing in their wild feminine self triggers people, right?
yeah.
And that's where then that dark energy comes in, and then we're like, oh yeah, I can't show my body, I can't dance like this. And that's what's happened to us. I find so many women are disconnected from that wild nature, men too, of course, oh my goodness. But it is, it's and you hear every culture has every tradition around the world has these cultural dances and these cultural songs, and how many of us do that anymore?
Yeah, no, I love it. I love everything that you just said. And there's so much that we could dig into around that, like the process of how that was taken away over the course of history, and why it was feared, and why it was labeled as, not good or whatever, because ultimately the patriarchy is afraid of that incredible power that is Shakti, moving the creative energy, and all the powers that it has to create transformation and healing and connection. And it also, it's very seductive, and it is linked to our sexual energy, and there's just so much distortion around that it's triggering, and men feel out. I mean, maybe not all men, this is a huge generalization when I say that, but traditionally, like, men submit to the power of that, intensity of feminine Shakti energy flowing and expressing. Like, it's just like, whoa, like they want it, but they want to control it.
Yes.
And they
Shape it.
don't want it to control them. And that's the reason why it's been like
And they just
distorted.
how to breathe.
They have to start with breath. Yeah, exactly.
You feel this sexual wildness, that just breathe it through.
Breathe into it, people.
But
Well, I think like with that metaphor of men being the fire pit, like I think it's natural for them to support the fire.
It is natural, yeah, in their like healthy expression, to be that keeper of the fire, the one to
Consume the
hold that
fire.
fire.
Consuming or shaping or controlling where it goes and we can see that in how sexuality has been. Okay, we can show sexuality in these ways, and it's been a male dominant view deciding that, and we can show sexuality in these ways but not this way. And it's a juxtaposition that women have held, that virgin versus whore idea, that you're supposed to somehow be both but you're shamed for being either. Like, you're supposed to have that purity, and yet you're supposed to not be frigid. Like, there's these things that girls get programmed with so young, and that's totally a whole other episode, I feel.
Yeah,
right?
I know.
And I think that this is just the start, because I'm seeing these like glimmers of so many parallel threads with all of us. And when you say everything's sacred, the logo I made for Sacred Fire Medicine Tour, which was a music tour that I was envisioning with workshops and a restoring workshop, which you also mentioned that you do a lot of that work. But my logo is All Are Sacred. And, it's kind of just there. I have 2 albums done, but my 3rd album will be on sacred sexuality, and it'll be called Dancing on the Edges. But I keep seeing myself in Vancouver recording that. So, I mean, you're going to be there, and Kaja is there a lot. I know she's in a space nearby. I don't know if you want me to say on the podcast, Kaja, what town you're in, but there's so much for us to create if we choose. I feel like the system is
Yeah, we
wrong.
have a trifecta energy going on here.
Well, thanks for your time today. And I hope that, again, our listeners check you out at ishtadevi.com, ishtAdevi.com. And I'll have the link in the podcast episode. And definitely take advantage of her free gift, which is a somatic breath exercise that she's gifting to all of you. So
yeah, my free gift might be changing and getting even better. So if you come over to the pod or over to the website, depending on when you land there, we'll see what's there. Could be
where can they find you on Instagram?
It's Ishta Devi. So ISHTADEVI is my handle.
Yay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.